You recall being asked with regard to the procedure, you had said that the procedure is usually my zone, my signature, correct?
Yes.
And you've testified to that
Yes.
in this trial. You recall being asked in the next question towards the end, Prosecutor Stoma asked you, I guess I'm going to ask you a broad question like this. I guess I'm going to ask you a broad question like this. Do you have, can you recall any deviations from the procedures, any specifics that you can recall? Your answer was specifically no. Do you remember that?
Yes.
The next question was right. As far as you know, your paperwork is going to be squared away, and your answer was correct. Correct?
Yes.
Now, having sit here today, after gone through cross-examination yesterday and today, was your paperwork squared away?
There were mistakes.
And you answered that because nobody from the prosecutor's office showed you any of your paperwork other than June 6th, correct?
Not to my recollection.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this. So this is the patrol log you submitted, correct?
Yes.
And you testified, correct me if I'm wrong, yesterday, that you did three things when you got, the first thing before you worked, you got the master list sent to you, you believe, by Lieutenant Goldridge, correct?
Yes.
Then you said, I then filled out the control sheet ahead of time. You remember saying that?
Yes.
And then you said you would check the posts.
Right.
That was your normal routine.
Yes.
When you say you filled out the, hang on. Sorry, Judge. When you say you filled out the patrol sheets ahead of time, what do you mean by that?
I would fill out the work location and the detail. My normal course of action normally would be to leave the name section blank because there were a lot of changes.
All right, you wouldn't take the names that were on the master list and write them down before you went out there because you knew there might be changes, correct?
As I recall, yes.
Okay. Now, this seems to me very neat, written, as you're going along. Do you recall if you were taking notes as you were going to the posts and then later on at the end of the shift writing everything down?
No, just the bottom portion would be most likely at the end of the tour.
Okay. So when you went out to, for example, at 6:55, you went out and you booked Tory at Broadway and 1 and 9. You didn't immediately put down on the bottom Skyway 7 being uncovered, correct?
Correct.
Because if you look at the bottom, you actually have them in sequential order. Skyway 1, Skyway 7, Skyway 9, Skyway 12 not covered, but you didn't go to those posts in that order, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So that was something you wrote in at the end.
Yes.
But based upon your testimony from yesterday and today, the only thing that you can tell us is that at based upon this paperwork, that at 6:55 a.m., you were somewhere near the corner of Broadway and 1 and 9 and signing Tory's voucher,
Yes.
correct? There's nothing to indicate that you had been at that location, Broadway and 1 and 9, between 6 and 6:55, correct?
Correct.
And after 6:55, there's nothing that you can recall from just looking at this paperwork that you ever went back to Broadway and 1 and 9, correct?
Between 6:55 and 07:25?
Even till 10 o'clock when you were done with your shift, because I'm assuming you
Nothing on
worked.
that says that, no.
Nothing, correct. And I'm assuming you worked till 10 o'clock that day because you
Yes.
got paid for 4 hours, right? So between 7:25 and 10 o'clock, you're checking to make sure there's no traffic issues and making sure everything.
And rechecking the post, yes.
But if you recheck the posts, you're not noting the times, correct?
Right.
So you don't know if on this particular day you rechecked any posts from this paper because you have no independent record.
On that particular day, I don't remember, but usually that's how I do it.
Okay. So you list that post as uncovered, the Skyway 7 post, which is Broadway 1 and 9, correct? Now, do you know if the DOT has any cameras that are stationed in Jersey City?
I believe they do, but I couldn't tell you where.
Okay. So you've heard from some source that DOT has cameras, but you don't know exactly where.
That's what I was told.
So you don't know if Broadway and 1 and 9 is one of those locations?
I don't know.
You recall when Mr. Sciarra was showing you some documents that reflected a signature that purported to be yours, but you had indicated it was not your signature?
There were several, yes.
Yes, I think maybe like 3 or possibly 4, correct?
Correct.
And you said you may have given them permission, the officers permission to sign your name, correct?
Yes.
All right. Have you ever heard the phrase booking by phone?
No.
Never heard that. Okay. Now, certainly if you're seeing the officer face to face and you're verifying that they're on their post, there would be no reason for the officer to sign your name to that sheet, correct?
Correct.
Because the normal procedure is you go up and you sign it and you can verify that that's my signature and the person can submit it and it gets checked and it gets paid, correct?
Yes.
So, but on at least those 3 or 4 occasions that we talked about, that was not your signature.
No.
And whether, let me ask you this, do you recall any situations where you might have been driving through Jersey City and because of traffic situations, you couldn't get to a specific post where an officer was working?
No. You have 4 hours to get there, so I should say.
Were there any times that you can recall that you were called to deal with Jersey City police business while you were a supervisor and off duty?
I wouldn't be dispatched from our radio room, but you would come across things, motor vehicle accidents or assaults or things like that.
Okay, and if you came across a motor vehicle accident and you had done all your posts, for example, you could deal with that situation as it was occurring?
Public safety first, yes, correct.
Okay. Is it possible, well, I'll strike that. Do you know if during the times that these 3 or 4 vouchers were signed by someone other than you, that you may have given permission for, that you were engaged in some other Jersey City related business?
Not specifically, but it's possible.
Okay. Can you give me any explanation as to why you would give permission to an officer to sign your name?
The one that comes to the top of my head is, and I've done it, where you actually encounter somebody in the corner, they're explaining a traffic situation, whatever the course of conversation is, and you drive away and you forget to sign their voucher after you were just with them for 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay.
And at that point, I just tell them, you were there, just probably tell you my name.
And how does that occur? How does that occur that you would say, you were there, go ahead and sign my name?
It's forgetfulness on my part, that would be.
No, but I'm saying, do you radio them? Do you call them on their cell phone?
Possible of a cell phone call.
Cell phone. All right. And a cell phone call, obviously, that doesn't go through the main system, so that wouldn't be recorded, correct?
Correct.
But a radio transmission, if someone had called in and said, hey, Lieutenant, you were Lieutenant at the time, you missed me, can you come back out and sign? And you could have given them permission over the air, correct, to sign for you?
I don't think I've ever given permission over the air, but it's, I've heard that happen.
Okay.
Chief Donnelly, you're familiar with general orders that are issued by the Chief of Police, correct?
For the most part, yes.
And as I understand it, when a general order is issued, the order is sent out to the districts, and officers are either provided with a copy of the general order, or the general orders are read to them at roll call. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you would be familiar with the general orders that have been issued by the Jersey City Police Department, at least while you've been a Jersey City police officer.
For the most part, yes.
I want to show you what's been marked S56. I'm sorry, D56. I asked you to take a look at it and read it over. Take a minute.
Wait. D55 is what we have. Or do you have a different marking for D55?
No, he just marked D56, I believe. That was the next one.
That's what I gave you.
We don't have a D55 though.
Oh, D55 was marked as
Something.
this witness's statement.
Ah, the witness statement is D55.
Marked for identification.
Okay, thank you. D56.
So take your time and take a look at it and let me know when you're ready.
Okay.
Chief Donnelly, you've seen that document before, or at least it's been read to you before, correct?
Don't recall, I heard about most of this. I don't remember reading this exact order myself, though.
So you're not sure whether or not that document, actual copy of that document, was handed to you as part of your patrol duty?
Not sure.
As I understood your testimony during Mr. Sciarra's cross-examination, Chief Donnelly, you were not aware of any written policies or procedures in connection with off-duty detail, specifically the Skyway detail, correct?
Correct.
And you're not sure whether or not, even at this point in time, if you've been provided with a copy of the exhibit that's before you, correct?
Yes, this was issued June of 2016. I worked midnight city command, so I didn't work out of a district. This may or may not have been inter-office mail to me.
Okay.
Either way, I don't remember seeing it.
Now, you touched upon the date issued being June 1st, 2016. Are you aware that that's approximately 1 week after the grand jury, the Hudson County grand jury, returned the indictment in this case?
I did not.
So prior to now, this might be the first time you've seen any written rules and regulations in connection with off-duty employment, correct?
Correct.
Now, this general order 516, does that number 516 mean that it's the 5th general order that's issued in calendar year 2016?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So General Order 516 is a multi-page document, correct?
Yes.
It's 4 pages long, correct?
Yes.
It discusses the purpose of the general order, correct?
Bless you.
Yes.
The policy of the general order, correct?
Yes.
It provides definitions to the officers receiving the general order, correct?
Yes.
On page 2, it begins with procedures that all members are required to follow concerning off-duty employment, correct?
Correct.
And it lists not one, but 19 different procedures that have to be followed by officers who work off-duty details, not counting subparagraphs, correct?
Yes.
Rather than go through the entire document, I'd like to focus you for just a minute on paragraph 12, if you can read that to yourself and let me know when you're done. Let me just read that first sentence out loud to you. It provides each off-duty supervisor shall visit all personnel assigned to him/her to review the job site, sign all off-duty officers' vouchers, parens, in the notes section, close parens, and ensure all regulations and rules are adhered to. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
So, based upon General Order 516, officers now know that they are required to visit every officer who's on a post, correct?
Yes.
And at that time, they're required to sign all off-duty officers' vouchers, correct?
Yes.
So you know now that it would be a violation of the policy for you to arguably book an officer by phone, correct?
Yes.
Or if an officer sent in a voucher to the Office of Off-Duty Employment, it would be a violation for the policy for, say, Lieutenant Goldridge to send the voucher to a supervisor to then have it signed then, correct?
I believe so, according to this.
Because it's not being signed at the time of the visit, correct?
Correct.
And now the signature has to be in the notes section of the voucher, correct?
Yes.
And you have S57 for you, correct?
Yes.
And is this the voucher that's still in existence or still in use for off-duty employment?
Yes.
So no longer does a supervisor have to sign their name in the foreman/authorized agent section, correct?
Correct.
All they have to do now is sign in the notes section, correct?
Correct.
Do you know the reason for that change?
No.
Particular exhibit, beginning with the first page, which is the master list, correct?
Yes.
And that's dated July 1st, 2014.
Yes.
And you're listed as the boss or the supervisor for the South District during the 3 to 7 p.m. shift,
Yes.
correct? And the master indicates that during that shift, Skyway 22, 23, and 24 are filled, correct?
Yes.
And they're filled by Colington, Salt, and Canzano, correct?
Correct.
And you actually book on the next page, your patrol sheet, those 3 officers, correct?
Yes,
But, and you booked them at the posts for Skyway 22, 23, and 24, correct?
yes,
But on the top of your patrol sheet, you indicate that those very same posts went uncovered, correct?
yes,
So that was a mistake, is it fair to say?
apparently, yes,
That was an anomaly in your paperwork that occurred on July the 1st, 2014, correct?
yes,
And that is, are you aware, I should say, are you aware that that is a date that my client is charged with?
no,
So that's that exhibit contains on the first page a voucher from Officer Joseph Dwyer for June 2nd, 2014, from 6 to 10 a.m., correct?
correct,
And the location on the voucher is Communipaw and Crescent, correct?
yes,
And that's your signature
No.
below, or is it not?
it's not,
You testified previously that it's not, in fact, your signature, correct?
correct,
Turn to the next page. And that's the master list for that same day, correct?
this is the invoice for the payment,
Oh, I'm sorry, then I have a different page. If you could just turn to the master list on that exhibit.
okay,
And take a look at Communipaw and Crescent. And is Officer Dwyer on the master list for that post? It's actually in the West District, correct?
West District, hang on a second. Oh, let's see. That's blank,
That's listed as open, right?
yes,
And the supervisor that day during that shift was supposed to be Sergeant Joy, correct?
correct,
And can you turn to Sergeant Joy's patrol sheet?
yes,
Is Officer Dwyer booked anywhere on that patrol sheet?
no,
So we have a voucher from Officer Dwyer, who's not on the master, who is not booked on the associated patrol sheet, and he is paid for the job according to the invoice that you have, correct? If you turn to the invoice, the bottom of the invoice, it's page 101 of 389. About 3/4 of the way down on that page, there's an entry for 6/2, June 2nd, 2014, relating to Joseph Dwyer, correct?
yes,
And it indicates that he got paid for the Pulaski Skyway detail for 4 hours on that date, correct?
yes,
Now, you had testified earlier in the day today that there were some times where you may have had an officer sign your name to a voucher, correct?
yes,
You seem to be pretty strong in your testimony that on this particular day, because you actually weren't working that day, but you were assigned to an off-duty detail that afternoon, that you wouldn't have given this officer your consent to sign your name to it,
it
correct?
would be very unlikely,
You can't say for sure as you sit here today that you didn't give him your consent.
yeah, I don't remember that day specifically, no.
Has the Jersey City Police Department, Sergeant Josward, talked to you at all about this paperwork from this day?
Sergeant Josworth sat in on my statement 3 years ago. That's the last I believe I dealt with him in regards to this.
And do you know whether or not there was any investigation into Officer Dwyer for that day?
Not to my knowledge.
Now, you have before you, I believe, S9, which are the exhibits from June 6th. If you just take a look at those. I'd like you to turn to S9W, which should be the master. Just tell me when you get there.
That's 9W. Okay.
Okay. The post 1 and 9 in Broadway was under your supervision that day, correct?
Yes.
And according to the master, 1 and 9 in Broadway was not covered, correct?
Correct.
Now turn to your patrol sheet, if you will, which is S9C.
Yes.
So, if I can back up. So, like D49, which was the Dwyer exhibit, there's nobody on the master for 6-6 at 1 9 and 9 in Broadway. And like Dwyer on the previous exhibit, if you take a look at your patrol log, there's no indication on your patrol log that you booked either Officer O'Neill or Officer Maietti that day, correct?
Correct.
And unlike you that day, where Dwyer was involved, on 6-6, Captain Ascalise was not a supervisor that day, was he?
Not according to the master sheet, no.
No, but as Skyway Commander, it was your understanding that he had the authority to sign a voucher, correct?
Correct.
And let's assume for just a moment that you signed, or at least gave Dwyer the consent to sign your name to his voucher. Similarly, my client, Joseph Ascalise, signed the vouchers for Maietti and O'Neill that day, correct?
I'm going to object to this question with respect to asking him to assume that he gave permission to sign. It's not Deputy Chief Donnelly's testimony at all. He's asking him to assume that he has, Deputy Chief Donnelly's testimony, I believe, was he has no recollection of ever doing that with respect to Mr. Dwyer.
Judge, I don't believe that was the testimony. I believe the testimony was that he doesn't have an independent recollection as of today whether or not he did, and that it was possible that he did. All I'm asking is to assume that he did that day, which was a possibility according to his testimony.
Correct. The objection is the same, only with regards to the form of the question. Take out the word assume. Just say, is it likely, with regards to what you did, that things could have happened to someone else? I prefer a question like that than that. All right? Thank you.
Not a problem, Judge. Officer Chief Donnelly, like June 2nd with Officer Dwyer, did in fact my client, Joseph Ascalise, sign the vouchers for Maietti and for O'Neill on June the 6th.
Yes.
And back in June of 2016, you had testified that you were aware that Captain Ascalise was in charge of the Special Patrol Bureau, correct?
Objection, Your Honor, 2014.
2004.
Did I say?
You said 16.
I'm sorry, 2014, was head of the Special Patrol Bureau, correct?
Correct.
And you were not in his direct chain of command at that time, were you?
No, I was patrol.
And as a result of the chain of command, did Captain Ascalise have an obligation to tell you who he was assigning where in connection with the Skyway detail?
I wouldn't call it as much an obligation as maybe courtesy.
Okay. But did he have an obligation to do it?
I should have been notified, I feel, yes.
Well, he could have notified you over the radio, correct?
Correct.
if Captain Ascalise was not in your, strike that. When Mr. Stoma asked you to explain why Captain Ascalise signed the vouchers for Maietti and O'Neill, you weren't aware of the fact that there was an MOU governing this project, were you?
Correct.
In fact, until today, over these last couple of days, you weren't aware of a significant amount of information in connection with that MOU, were you?
There's a lot of information in it, correct, yes.
You weren't aware that pursuant to the MOU, 55 officers were assigned to the Skyway project, were you?
Correct, I only know what's on the master sheet.
So as far as you knew, only 52 officers were assigned to the Skyway project to fill the 52 posts, correct?
I believe that's a number, yes.
You didn't know about the 3 excess officers, correct?
Correct,
Or the 2 additional emergency responders, correct?
correct,
You didn't know that part of Jersey City Police Department's obligation was not just to man these 52 posts, but it was to patrol the vehicular detour routes, correct?
correct,
And you didn't know that pursuant to the MOU, that Jersey City Police Department was also required to patrol the pedestrian detour routes, correct?
correct.
You've learned that over the course of your testimony only today, correct?
Yes.
So, having learned what you've learned over the last couple of days, is it fair to say that knowing what you know now, there could very well be a proper explanation for why Captain Ascalise signed the vouchers?
Then I have that, yes.
And nothing further.
That's it with respect, those were all the days, Judge, that were addressed on cross-examination. Those were
They
days,
listed all the pay vouchers.
those were days where if the witness, if you want to have the witness step down, I'll explain it.
No, that was it. That's all I needed to know. I
Did
didn't
you?
know if this was going to go on any longer. With
That-
regards to a whole bunch of pay vouchers being shown for this witness to compare it to the master list or his patrol log.
Judge, with respect to this particular witness, that's it for this,
Okay.
that's it for this particular
No,
witness.
then why don't we take our afternoon break, if that's okay? Do
I
you need a break?
I do need a break, and I do have some more questions for.
All right, and then we'll continue this 10 minutes, okay?
Okay, you were also asked on cross-examination, to take a look at what's S59 in evidence, the MOU, specifically paragraph 3.1. And your question about your understanding of the number of posts that were possibly created under the MOU, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. I just want to, and you were asked to read aloud the first sentence, starting with "to provide." I'm going to ask you to finish that just for the court, just so I can ask you some questions. The number, starting with the number of police officers from that point. If you could just read that aloud. The second sentence.
55 police officers with all equipment, parentheses, including but not limited to service weapons, and the parentheses.
No, you read that part. The second full sentence, starting with the number of police officers.
The number of police officers, public safety officials, parentheses, as provided for under paragraph 3.3B, below, end of parentheses, or emergency responders for the Skyway shutdown noted above may be adjusted, comma, and will be ultimately decided by the Commissioner of Transportation or his designee in consultation with the city's public safety director, the JCPSD, and subject to availability as determined by the JCPSD, period, the Commissioner of Transportation or his designee, and the JCPSD shall coordinate all issues concerning all city police assigned to the Skyway shutdown. It is specifically understood that there is no guarantee of no guarantee, I'm sorry, my glasses, of minimal usage of city police, and that usage is dependent upon the Commissioner of Transportation's decision.
Do you recall ever seeing a roster sheet, the citywide DOT roster sheet with more than 52 posts?
Not specifically.
I just wanted you to, if you could go to page 2 of the MOU and read the second whereas clause.
Whereas, to avoid disruption, city police may be needed to, 1, direct traffic at selected intersections along the vehicular detour routes.
Right.
2, drive the vehicular detour routes to enforce permanent and temporary parking restrictions needed to promote the smooth flow of traffic. And 3, ensure pedestrian control and safety along the pedestrian detour routes, especially in the vicinity of Dickinson High School, when the Route 139/Palisade Avenue intersection is closed to pedestrian traffic wishing to cross Route 139.
Now, could you take a look at what you were shown yesterday as a package of D54? I think it's up there. And D54, I think, was represented was maybe 21 or 22 of your patrol sheets,
Yes.
activity logs.
Yes.
In looking at the work locations of all of those, what do they refer to? The work locations on your
The assigned DOT post.
assigned DOT posts. And where do those assigned DOT posts, do they correspond with the roster sheet, with the applicable roster sheet?
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever supervise, in your experience on the DOT, on DOT details, did you ever supervise an officer who did anything other than stand at post?
Not to my recollection.
No, not to your recollection. Okay. Based upon your experience as a supervisor on all these days, right, do you recall ever supervising an officer who was assigned to drive a traffic route?
No.
Do you recall ever in your time as a supervisor, do you ever recall even hearing about the existence of DOT details where police officers working those details would drive around?
Objection, yes.
It's the same. Well, did you see? You said as to observe?
I'm asking him, did he ever hear of the existence
It's the
of?
same. It is hearsay.
Because it's not hearsay if he didn't hear it. Seriously, Judge, I mean, I'm not asking him, I'm asking him if he had any knowledge of it. Did he ever hear about it? Did he, as a supervisor, did he ever hear about it? I think it's not hearsay if he didn't, it's a yes or no question, and it's not hearsay if he didn't hear anything about it. It's not an out-of-court statement for him to say, I never heard anything. That's not hearsay, Your Honor. It's not. It's not an out-of-court statement admitted for the truth of the matter asserted. In fact, quite frankly, it's the opposite. It's not hearsay. It's not an out-of-court statement. If he says yes, then maybe it's a different story about where he heard it. If he says no, then it's not hearsay for him not to have any information on that regard.
Judge, the answer is built into the question. So he's feeding the witness what the hearsay statement could be.
Judge, this witness has answered questions over and over and over with respect to,
All right, listen, stop. All right, only because this is a bench trial. It goes to the weight, I'll tell you that, with regards to any hearsay, with regards to this question, if it's in the negative, which is what I presume it's going to be. That this court may give it very little weight, okay? So, based upon what your arguments, prosecutor, I'm going to overrule the objection if it's the response is in the negative, that he did not hear something, which is very difficult, you know, when you don't do something, how to cross-examine something that someone didn't do, or hear, whatever it may be. But for that reason, I'll allow you to ask the question. Do you remember the question?
Could you repeat the question?
in your time as a supervisor on DOT details, did you ever hear of a DOT Skyway shutdown detail where an officer would be assigned to perform the duties of driving around and checking on traffic?
I had no personal knowledge of that.
No personal knowledge of that.
Correct.
And did you ever supervise anything other than an officer standing a post
No.
for DOT?
Correct.
Never, right?